Welcome back, everyone, to Merge Conflict, your weekly developer podcast about all things in the world of software development. Today, we're talking about not AI, but we're going to sprinkle a little AI in there, Frank, because I want to bring to attention, Frank Krueger, my inspiration in the last week was you.
I love being an inspiration. I think that's why you still allow me on this podcast. Do tell. How did I inspire you, James?
Well, as a fan and friend of the show once said, Frank, your UI is an inspiration. Simple, clean. I have so much to learn from you.
Do I get a bell? Bell? Thank you. That was a. It's a humble brag, but like I'm taking it. So Miguel said something nice to me, and I'm ringing a bell. Ding. Hi, Miguel. Thanks for saying something nice about me.
Yes, that was pretty good. You came out with an application called Clean Room not too long ago, which is about managing virtual Macs. We talked about it on this podcast. And I think I was inspired. It is a very clean UI, actually. I've actually been thinking a lot about clean Mac UI and clean Windows UI and how kind of similar they are in a way. They have this like fly out, overlappy navigation drawery thing on the left-hand side, which does a bunch of things.
Right.
That's been in Windows as well. It's kind of been in Mac as well. But with the Mac, are we on Tahoe? Is that what we're on now? The Mavericks?
Sure. I keep saying Tahoe. I hope that's right. 26.
Mac OS 26. I don't like all the rounded corners. I do like this rounded corner specifically. Fly out navigation thingy. The sidebar. The sidebar.
Yeah.
I like a good sidebar. They're inspirational. They take up room, but they can go away when you don't need them. And your application is very nice. It's very fluid. It's very pretty to look at. But I think I was inspired because you're like, I wanted an application. So I built an application and you built it pretty quick. And I said, you know what? If Frank can build an application, I bet I can build an application too.
That's mean, kind of. If this idiot can do it, I certainly can do it.
Exactly. And I can do it with AI, Frank. That is for sure.
Wow. Okay.
I was inspired by this app.
Probably right.
I was inspired by this app, but then also inspired by the fact that we talked about cross intelligence, your Swift intelligence. We talked about Apple intelligence, all the intelligence on device. And I thought to myself, I have a conundrum, which is there seems to be a bunch of power in my Mac that I dislike. Not that it's powerful, but that I dislike my Mac. I'm like, well, what if I can make really powerful software for myself that I can just like use on my Mac, and maybe that'll make me love my Mac more.
Oh, okay. I didn't know you were having a falling out with your Mac, but I do totally get the feeling of there's a lot of horsepower here, and all I keep doing is scrolling Twitter. I don't feel like I'm using all the horsepower that this computer provides, and I feel a little bit bad, like the people working on computational theory in the 40s and the 50s. I'm like, if only they knew that I was using all that power to just scroll through endless feeds of people's banal lives, then how depressed would they be? So I totally get that feeling of wanting to use the power you bought, you paid for. It's sitting there. Might as well use it.
Yeah. And I was inspired by this. And there's a few other inspirations here that I think is of interest to kind of talk about is there are a lot of really good APIs in macOS and iOS that are just freely available. So we talked first about Apple Intelligence, right? We did some podcasts on it where basically you have a little medium, small LLM sitting there ready to go, multimodal.
Small. We'll call it small. I think back in the day I would have called it medium, but these days we'll call it small. I think it's about it's two it's about 2 gigabytes, 2 to 3 gigabytes. I think it's about 4 or 5 billion parameters.
Yeah, not bad. I like that. That's pretty cool. And there's a bunch of other APIs built in to the device that normally you'd have to pay for. Like that's something you'd have to pay for, right? If you want to, do some analysis of some text or something like that. But there's also built-in translation APIs. I don't know if you knew this, but you can download translation packs. You can query translation packs, download them for the user, like prompt for the user to open their settings and download them. And then if you have English or another language and you have another language pack, you can translate it to that other language pack and that other language. So that's pretty cool. It's just
Let me
built right
stop you
in.
there. Is that an API separate from Apple Intelligence? Because no, I didn't actually know about that, and I should be using it in my own apps. Is that a separate? Apple loves creating kits. Is that a separate kit or a framework or something?
Well, it's in my app that you can go and look
Mhm.
at. Where? Good question.
You didn't code this.
Translation.
Some AI did.
Import translation.
Translation. Okay, so it's a whole separate module. It's a whole separate thing. That's cool. Do you know if that's happening on device or off device?
It
Maybe
is
it's on
happening.
device because you said you have to download a pack or something, huh?
It is right on your device, Frank Krueger. And yeah,
Fascinating.
you can see if things are installed. You parse it. You get a bunch of translated entries. You ask it to translate them from one language to another language, and bingo bango, it does it, which is pretty cool. So you can imagine, let's say you had iCircuit where users were submitting content. You could detect what
Mhm.
language it's in, and then you could have a translate button to the user's local language, right? Which is pretty nifty. And then you don't have to pay for that. That's really convenient. Um, let's say you're a podcast. Let's say you have a podcast or you make videos for the internet and you wanted
Hypothetically.
to, hypothetically, you wanted to translate a transcript. You
Hmm?
could
Maybe.
rely on Google to do it for you, or you could translate it yourself and probably get better output than that, because the Apple models are pretty
Hmm.
stinking good, to be honest with you.
Is it?
Yeah, it's pretty good. I had Heather
Okay.
review English to Spanish. It was pretty solid, even in tech, our lingo. And there's another one, which is actually like built in walking directions.
Yeah. It's honestly impressive how many APIs are there. They've had a directions API for a long time. It used to be contingent, like you had to show a map in order to legally use that API, but I think they even removed all those requirements and all that. I think you can just use the API now.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, getting to your overall point, it is kind of amazing how many APIs are in the Apple SDK these days. Like every year, it seems like they add something.
Yeah. And I was most intrigued, obviously, about the power of the LLM being sitting there right now. We could talk about power and game power and 3D rendering and ray trace shaders and all these things, right? Everyone's talking about RT shaders.
Love them.
Loves the ray tracing. But I thought, because I was building feedback flow and doing sentiment analysis of it, I thought it'd be really cool if I could think of an idea that would be of use to us, actually, and save me time. So I thought of it like this: is there are several things that I do every single week for this podcast. So the first thing that I do is I create a thumbnail, and I have a PSD file. And for the last 498 episodes,
Amazing.
I've opened up photop.com, opened up the PSD, found it on my computer, opened it, found a photo on the internet, drug it in, edited the number, exported to PNG or JPEG, and uploaded it. It takes a little bit of time, 5 minutes. Move it around, scale it. The other thing I do is
And I should say I really appreciate that. If anyone didn't know this, James does all the production work. I'm just the talent. I just show up here and spout stuff. He does all the real work.
well, and then
So I
I thought
appreciate you wanting to automate your process.
I try. Well, then I thought we also have transcripts, and now Zencaster pumps out a transcript automatically, which is really convenient. But it does it in a text file, which is fine for Fireside, our host, our podcast host. But I'd love to upload those as SRT transcript files, subtitles for YouTube. So I'd love to convert that. That's just a simple conversion. But then I thought, wouldn't it be so cool if we took the transcript, which we one-shot this puppy, and we created chapters for YouTube?
Ooh, now we're getting advanced. Now we're getting into intelligent work. Yeah, because you don't want to write an algorithm yourself for that. I think I've tried in the past and they come out kind of terrible.
Now, some people would say, James, just put that in Copilot, put it in ChatGPT, and ask it to do it. And the answer is yes. But then I wouldn't be writing my own custom program for myself, Frank Krueger. And what fun is that?
Are you saying you wrote an agent? Did you use an agent to write an agent? This is sounding a lot like an agent, and I think we're in agent writing territory now.
I cracked open my VS Code, as one does, and that's where they write Swift applications. The very first thing I did,
you wrote a Swift app. I love
or a
this.
Swift
This
app.
is exciting.
Oh no, not
You
Swift.
are really out of yours. You're writing an app for yourself. Usually you write apps for other people, and you're writing it in Swift. This is kind of, did you have the crazy pills one day? Or is this really just my influence? I like to think it's my influence.
I thought to myself, well, could I do all of this in Maui? And the answer is yes. I mean, you have a nice, beautiful cross intelligence API. Maybe I should have. But what fun is it to write in the programming language that you know, in a framework that you know, in an operating system that you know, and or even in an IDE that you know? That is no fun at all, Frank. That is not how I YOLO, sir.
I mean, I think programmers are thrill seekers. And by thrill, I mean, we like to learn stuff. We're just nerds. We're nerd thrill seekers. And stepping outside of your box is always, it's always enticing. You got to test if the grass is greener over there. You don't know if it is unless you walk over and try the grass out.
Yeah. And I've written.
Does that work?
It's 100% accurate. It's all accurate. The grass is so green and so brown all at the same time. And sometimes you don't have grass at all. You have zero-scape. And then I thought to myself, I've written tons of Objective-C and tons of Java code in my early days of cross-platform mobile development, doing bridges, doing custom work, XYZ. And I haven't written any Swift code like at all. Maybe the tiniest demo for bridge, but I was pretty hands off, and it's really obviously stabilized. And I'd never touched SwiftUI either. So I'm really out of the loop. And what's the best way to learn but to have Copilot write out the code for you?
Oh, dang. Okay, you were doing so well up to that point. What's the best way to learn is to do. What's the second best way to learn? Have someone else do or have an AI do. Okay, fair enough. But honestly, we've been saying since the beginning, a huge part of these AIs is learning. So even if you just glance at the code it generates once in a while, I'm curious how much you glanced at the code or if you know nothing about it, because I know you're all about the vibes. I'm curious to know, did you go 100% vibe, or are we talking like 90% vibe?
Well, my process here was to set myself up for a little bit of success. So I decided to not use Xcode. So that was my first thing in general. That may not have been super successful to create the project, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to go all in. I'm going to go straight vibes, which means VS Code, Copilot, and some MCP servers. The Xcode build MCP, obviously have Xcode. I added a few custom instruction files just around like Swift programming best practices that I found on the internet. And then
these you just randomly Googled, you just pulled in random instruction files.
Well, I asked it to go find like modern conventions.
Even better. Okay, great. Yeah.
And then do it. So no, there's just the tiniest thing. What I ended up doing was I had to generate the files, but mostly about like the patterns that I'm using, which is like model, view model, like observable object stuff. We're in the MVVM days. It's a beautiful thing, baby. Little builds, little things. So nothing, mostly around SwiftData. I use core data, and then Frank told me to rewrite in SwiftData, which I did. So I did like best practices. And the cool part here is I installed both the Xcode MCP and also the Apple documentation MCP. And I do this because I do very similar things writing .NET code and C# code, which I have the Microsoft Learn MCP or the Aspire MCP, which allows me to go and talk to community docs or builds or things like this at the same time of like what I'm running. So this was really helpful. The Xcode build MCP helps you scaffold things, do best practice, launch emulators, simulators, build your app, and a whole lot more. And it did give me the code structure that you see in front of you, which you don't agree with, but it's using a workspace or something. Not a fan.
It very over-engineered it. So yeah, I've actually looked at your code. I'll put all pretenses away.
You liked it.
It did a funny thing. It put like your app in a package. Fine, like it makes it reusable, but not really, because it's SwiftUI. It really only has one place to deploy, which is Apple platforms. It's a little over-engineered. I've never seen anyone actually bother to put their whole app in a package. And then for that reason, like you can't even open your Xcode project file. You have to open a workspace file, or else it can't find that package.
Yeah, solution.
So I find it a tiny bit annoying, those choices that it made. But I do want to say, like, I do idolize you for your use of MCP servers. It doesn't even occur to me to go find like an Apple documentation MCP. It doesn't even. I just assume if the network doesn't know, the network doesn't know. Whatever. I'll just move on. It's pretty cool that you know about those. So while I don't agree with the project structure, the Xcode build or whatever the MCP server was that thought up this terrible project structure, it's kind of cool. It never occurred to me to put the app in a package, and I'm like, oh, that okay. Talk about being outside the box a little bit. And now I know what it would look like, and I know I'll never do that because it's super annoying to put your app into a package.
But it's there. So
It's there.
yeah, it did take me a little bit to find the code, but once I found the code, I was good to go. Yeah, so this was pretty neat. I decided again, I was just going to use SwiftUI so I could learn it. And the cool part about the AI is that you can just ask it questions, right? So what it generated, why it generated it, and all these things. And the Apple docs are really nice too, because in plan mode, you can have it search all these docs. So what's nice is that this can get all of the samples, WWDC
Right.
content, search framework
Nice.
symbols, search Apple docs, resolve references. You can ask it for specific years of content. It can find similar APIs. It can do a bunch of stuff, which is really, really nice, and pull that into the context window. So I really like that. And that was be a big benefit.
I hope you'll link to it in the show notes because it never there Apple's documentation has improved over time, but it really is spread out over multiple places. And you brought up the big one. It's those WWDC videos. It's surprising how often you have to go to a WWDC video to actually
Oh, yeah.
understand how something works.
Oh, yeah. So I just kind of got to work. I actually started this application very small. It was a single screen app with just
Okay.
like tabs.
Mhm.
And it only had two things. It was like take the text file and make it an SRT file. That took about 5 seconds
Okay.
to build. And then there was the image kind of creator, and there's no
Oh, right.
database or
Yeah.
anything. It was just like a very simple tab. The image creator, it did really good. I'm assuming with core graphics, and just like it was really seamless, and just fonts, custom fonts, loading custom fonts. I now
Cool.
list
Yeah.
all of the system fonts installed on your machine instead of just a few of them. And it can see everything, and it was storing everything as well, just in system preferences. And it scaffolded that out. I think I had that working in like 30 minutes probably. And I was like,
So
cool, I'm
that's
good.
it. Okay, so we should say again, this is a production app for you, or post production, a production app for. We've recorded the episode, but there's so much metadata, just like releasing an app. There's so much metadata you need to generate for all this stuff.
Mhm.
I'm curious. I feel like the icon generation can be a real rabbit hole. I know I personally would over-engineer that UI. I would have layer support and options for all the layers and import this kind of image format and all that. Did you have a hard time restraining yourself to what that UI would be? Because this started out, you said you were inspired by my beautiful UIs. I appreciate that. But it's hard to whittle down a UI to be succinct and single purpose and all that stuff. So is it just like you gave very vague directions to an AI and this is the first thing it spit out and you're like, good enough? Or did you actually have pretty concrete plans on what you wanted for the icon generator?
Yeah, well, the thumbnail generator. Yeah, the thumbnail
Thumbnail, I should
generator.
say. Yeah.
That one, because I did generate the icon for the app with AI. But no, this one was pretty simple. I said, listen, I have a background image that I'm going to give you, and then I'm going to
Hmm.
have an overlay image that I'm going to give you, and that's going to have this is important. The overlay is going to have transparent properties for it. That's important because you need to
Hmm.
preserve it if you like downsample it to JPEG or something. And then I said, I want to be able to scale those backgrounds. And then I want to be able to, so it's really like two layers. So layer. And then I
Yeah.
said, I want to be able to place text on top of it for the podcast episode, usually the episode number, but it's going to be custom text. And I want to be able to adjust where to put it. And that was pretty much it, to be honest with you. And I said it was a YouTube thumbnail, so it kind of had the context that it's 16 by
Yeah.
9. It
Big
decided
font.
it decided to do a few things, and then I refined it. So it actually one-shotted it, I would say,
Okay. Cool.
overall. It did decide to go like full 4K by default, which was fascinating. It did do a full preview. I've worked on the preview a little bit since then. But yeah, it pretty much was like pick a file. It imported the correct um, file picker permissions that it needs on top of it. And then it just sort of had a little preview. It had a scrolly. I've then refined and said, oh, can you like do a fit to, can you scale it, auto scale the background, blah, blah, blah. Let me do background scaling, fill, fit, aspect ratio, blah, 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 the custom things. It decided that it really wanted to put an outline on the font. And I was like, give me an option. And then it didn't do any padding. So it only gave me position, which was like top left, top right, what bottom center. And I said, let me adjust the padding all around. So I refined it quite a bit. But I would say, honestly, that I had that just the thumbnail generator. Now it's not generating images. You're choosing an image, right? It's not. No, I could, I guess.
It's a compositor. Yeah,
it is a thumbnail compositor. But for all intents and purposes, I was opening this Photoshop file, doing layers, dragging it around, and it's just like was unruly. Whereas like all I'm doing is changing 488 to 489, different background image, go. And then I also told it that I want to be able to paste from my clipboard, and it did figure out how to do that, which is kind of crazy, but it kind of one-shotted it, which is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll toot Apple's horn. They have great graphics APIs, and their clipboard stuff is pretty easy. So if you know what you're doing, it's not the hardest code to write. I think it's all that graphic stuff is pretty well built in. So I think it's always just a matter of getting a good user interface up there and making sure you can actually generate the kind of thumbnails that you want. That's what I was curious. When I saw that you had the thumbnail thing, I'm like, oh, does that mean all of our thumbnails are going to look the same from now on? Or were you able to, still add a little bit of spice and creativity? If we need a Halloween theme one or something like that, will you still be able to do that? I think that's always the hard part when you start automating production stuff, is you lose the variability. But I'm happy that you're happy. Sounds like sounds like it's easy to modify too if you do need a Halloween theme or something like that in the future.
Yeah, I think that was what made it pretty easy, was to go in and say, okay, I'm going to just kind of do this and see how it turns out in general. And it kind of just, was an easy one shot. And I think from like that point of view, if I wanted to stop there, then I could have easily stopped. But then of course, nobody just stops there. Because the next thing is like, okay, well, I have a bunch of podcasts and I have a bunch of podcast episodes. Now we really need to create an entire podcast manager at this point, right? Like, I just don't want to open it. Okay. I want to save the history.
This was a single view, one. Okay, right. The UI was just a one-time kind of thing. Now you want a database. You want the Microsoft access of podcasts. Okay.
I truly do. So I went into plan mode. I went into refactoring mode. I went into VS Code. And I went into plan mode, and I was like, here's what I want to do. I want to turn it into this. I was like this. I actually pointed it at the Xcodes app source code. So Xcodes allows you to manage multiple Xcodes. It's open source, and it looks really nice. And it has a nice flyout. It has a cool thing. It looks better than my app, but someone paid attention to it. And it looks very nice.
I don't like the new icon. Sorry, new icon people. They changed the icon. I hate change.
I also do not like the icon either. That is correct. But I was like, hey, here's some reference code. Go find samples, do this stuff for split view, XYZ on it, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I want podcasts, I want episodes, I want to do blah, 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 blah in it. And I said, I want to use core data, because all I knew is core data. And actually, like, that pretty much one-shotted it pretty good. And I said, I want the existing functionality. I want these details. I want these things. And I want the transcript and the thumbnail and like details, and store that data and that information in it. Cause I don't want to like reopen the transcript every time, or the SRT file. I want to export. I want to come back. I said, I want defaults. I said, every podcast should have defaults. Like, here's a default, like overlay, default, text location, all these things. So that the podcast is going to store information about what the default for every podcast would be as well inside of there. And that went really well. And then somebody told me to use SwiftData, and that's where everything went awry.
Oh, that's me. But I just wanted to say, like, you did the classic UI thing of you start with basically a script. Here's some inputs and it generates some outputs. It's a function, it's a script, however you want to think of it. And you switch to an editor where it
Yeah.
persists state and you can come back and work on it again and that kind of stuff. There's a big difference. And it takes a lot more planning to build an editor versus just a scripty thing that takes inputs and spits out outputs. I apologize. The core data thing, core data's fine, and obviously it works just fine in SwiftUI. The thing is, boy, I think it's just like, didn't I'm sorry. I'm forgetting what Visual Studio used to have database designer files, and I used to live inside those designer files because I loved making my little boxes and my little relationship arrows and all that kind of stuff. And that's the original core data schema designer built into Xcode. But I think in this year 2025, we've all kind of moved on to kind of code first data modeling. And that's why I always feel like the old-fashioned core data stuff is a little fuddy-duddy, a little old-fashioned, and it's more fun to go code first.
Yeah.
With SwiftData. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that this was a good lesson and learning opportunity for me. Like the reason that the core data stuff worked really good is like core data has been around forever. But I also went into a like full plan mode. So don't sleep on plan agent mode inside of like VS Code, because it asks me tons of questions, like backup. It just asks you questions upon questions. You can just say, what other questions? What other questions? Like really refine it. It's my new favorite thing for anything pretty big at all, or medium size, or even small. Just if it's not like just one or two pages, like I'm adding a new piece of functionality. Let me think through all these things. And this is good because it asks me questions about the data type and this thing and the relations, like what this data and that data, blah, blah, blah. And it asked me a lot about iCloud sync and this thing. Do you want to set it up now? What do you want to set up later? What does it need to be ready? All these other things. So it did really, really good. And the plan mode is just like a mode that you can change in VS Code, and it generates a full markdown file and you can rev on it. I think for the Swift data, it actually one-shotted it. Like it did the thing I asked it to do, which was more simple, which was like, hey, this is in core data, convert it to Swift data and go look at documentation to figure that out. And kind of go from there. So I think that like that was really, really interesting to like have it go down this rabbit hole in general.
That's awesome because I sometimes I'm always in agent mode because I'm too lazy to click a checkbox or switch modes or anything like that. And I'm always like, don't write any code. Please, let's just talk about this and ask me lots of questions. I want to get this right. So that's actually cool. You'll have to tell me how you actually switch into that mode. Because it's definitely not something I'm taking advantage of right now.
Just go from agent plan.
Oh,
that's it.
Okay, fine.
It's just a mode.
You're gonna make me click on the drop down box. Fine.
You got to click.
I guess I can do that.
It could be like ideally like, Clippy comes up and is like, hey, do you want to do some planning? You know what I mean? And I think that would be pretty good. Well, so let me talk a little bit in detail here for a little bit and spiral about what happened next in SwiftData and what led me awry. So I'll go on a little tangent here, if you will.
Cool.
Sounds
fun.
Yeah. Okay. So I went down this path where I was going to go off and start to do a bunch of work, basically, on the Swift data. And the conversion all went super good. So I think Copilot, and I used the cloud agent, and it was really spectacular for like the work that it did. Now, the interesting part of this is that as soon as I implemented Swift data and started using the application, I made a little YouTube video. I'll put a link in there. I noticed that it started to be like a little sluggish. I was like, that's so weird. Like the flyout navigation drawer like isn't going. And I was like, what is it? Now I did add a few things on the flyout, which was like, show me the podcast, show me the episodes, add searching and filtering for them. And I was like, maybe it's the layout system. Maybe it's that. And I went into the most complex deep dive that I have ever done, using every model I could think of like, what is this problem? I rewrote that user interface 5 times, over and over and over again, maybe 10 times, to be honest with you. And it kept optimizing layouts and optimizing this and optimizing that. And I was like, no, this is not it. So I said, I need to figure out, I'm going into my debug mode, and what is the thing that's actually causing the delay? Because I noticed in my thumbnail that when I would move a slider, it was also very sluggish. Everything was sluggish. I was like, what is going on? Is it my machine? I rebooted and it's the same. And I was like, okay, remove all. I was like, I want you to remove from the core piece. Don't delete any code from the UI elements, but strip back. I want to debug the performance, remove the UI. We're going to add it back piece by piece. So the agent was like, cool, let's do this. And it did, it kind of like commented out the main UI view, the stack of it for all intents and purposes. And I said, okay, I want you to add back the header. Open the app. I was like, cool, performance is great. Let's add back the next section. Cool, performance is great. Let's add in the next section. And then what was the thing that the performance did any little back and forth on. And it was really when I put in the episodes. So like the podcast itself was fine, but when I put in the episodes, everything really slowed down. And I went through and I was like, okay, I know that this wasn't a problem with core data. It has to be something with SwiftData. So I asked Codex, I think, to do deep research, understanding everything. I said, what is the problem? I don't remember if Codex figured it out, if you figured it out, Frank, which was like, you're doing, like, are you saving a bunch of big data? And I was like, well, I'm saving the image, but I'm saving it, base 64 encoded. I don't know. It feels like it shouldn't be there. And then I forget if it was you or I think it was you. I think you looked at my code and you're like, oh, yeah, I had you review the code and you said, oh, you are storing everything as like one data piece basically instead of like a reference or something like that. What is that thing called? Like the fragment?
Well, in database stuff, it's just called first normal form. Like you're just putting too much data into one table, basically. So whenever you're just trying to look up, say, like a podcast name, you're also downloading the entire transcript, the entire image file, all that stuff, because like any object relational manager, it makes assumptions. And the
Yeah.
biggest assumption it makes is if you're going to access an object, you're going to want to touch every field. And so it has
Yeah.
to grab every field from the database. I want to take credit, but I'm pretty sure you found that on your own. And then I merely made fun of you for your bad database design.
Oh,
Like,
yes.
oh, James, come on, rookie mistake.
So the first route that I went down, funnily enough, I was like, well, I can tell that core data or the Swift data is clearly a problem here. And what's unique about SwiftData is that everything automatically saves and updates. So when you change something in the UI, it like automatically updates in the database. It's like very magical and it just works and it'll sync across devices. So I said, well, that's not how normally I code. Like I don't normally code that. I usually am transactional. So I was like, let me strip this back. So actually before I fixed it correctly, which you told me like a better way of fixing it, what I did is I created a shadow DOM basically. I said, you have the database, get it from the database, put it locally, and then when I hit save it back to the database. And that worked, by the way, which was like how I use SQLite, right? That just is how I use it. And it works magically. It fixed my problem because it's getting the data, but it's not saving the data every single time I change one slider or change one little thing or anything like that.
Yeah, and honestly, I couldn't make fun of you too much for that solution because it's a very frank solution. It's very much what I would do, to be honest. If an API isn't working the way you want, whatever. Life's too short. I'm just going to work around it. If it's querying too much, fine. I'll show you a fast query. Reading something from RAM. That's the fastest query you can do. Um, I think I only took exception to it because you were losing a lot of built-in features in SwiftData by going that route. When you start fighting an API, that's when things go bad. And not in a bad way. Like you said, you got it working, but it was a whole bunch of code that you had to write. I don't know, 500, maybe even 1,000 lines of code sitting there that just essentially, if you just change things a little bit, you won't need to write those. And worse, you were missing out on basically the replication features of SwiftData. One of the best features of core data, and it's something I wish I could integrate into SQLite, is it has automatic synchronization with CloudKit if you want it. So if someone has an iOS version of your app, which this doesn't fully apply to an app that you're just writing for yourself, but I get that. But it's a major feature of if you have an iOS version of your app and a Mac version of your app, the two can stay in sync. Or if you have two Macs and you add a podcast to one, it shows up in the other. It's a really nice feature, honestly. As someone who's done a lot of data syncing in their career, I don't want to write that code. It's so much better that someone else wrote that code and I can just take advantage of it. It's not the hardest code in the world to write, but it's full of bugs and it's difficult to get right. So I just felt bad because you were doing work you didn't need to do and you were missing out on features. But I can't even make fun of you too much because it's a totally valid solution. You had a problem, you solved it.
I solved it. And then you were like, there's like this way to do like relation and external storage and like query it on demand and do all this stuff. And I was like, I could go read some docs, but let me just ask the docs. So I was like, hey, I said, I want you to, I'm like, I think I know the problem. And it was like, oh yeah, here's the problem. It was like, once I said, I think the problem is that I'm storing a bunch of data that's like really big. I was like, yep. It's like, yep, that's a problem. And it's all like, I was like, okay, well, how do I fix this problem? I'm like, in your vast knowledge search, go find all of the best practices for modern, more recent, search every single, and start with the newest WWDC videos, the newest samples, the newest documentation, XYZ, and figure out the solution. And then like, it literally implemented it. Now to go from my shadow DOM to like normal DOM, it like refactored it in like 20 minutes and it like all worked. And now everything works perfect. It's all flawless and have no issues pretty much at all. The UI is still kind of a hot mess because I run in high DPI, but for me, it's perfect because it's an app for me, solo person. That's all it is. And it's great. And like the cool part is that it actually did all the SwiftData stuff. I can ask it questions about it. It implemented light theme, dark theme automatically. It's just using system defaults. I said, don't use any custom things. Just use the stuff that's in the box. I don't know if it actually struggled a lot with toolbars. That was the biggest struggle. And I don't know if I love my use of toolbars, but it struggled a lot.
Me neither. Well, honestly, because toolbars is one of those things that keeps changing a little bit. And the Mac support especially kept changing over time. But it's funny. I just want to say, like, in general, I happen to like SwiftUI. I think it's a great way to write apps, but it gets a lot of flack for being slow. And I think a lot of that slowness can be caused when you don't fully understand how it works and how its invalidation system works and when it decides to re-render, what work it needs to do when it does a re-render. It's nice that Apple developed an API or stole it from React, however you want to say it, which makes writing user interfaces easy. But then it's another step that we as programmers or as AIs need to learn that system kind of in depth so that when we don't paint ourselves into corners like this, or if there is a performance issue, we know how to solve them and what can cause them. And I'm very happy that AIs were able to figure it out. But I would also say, like, if this was your day job, if writing SwiftUI Mac apps was your day job, you would learn these basic rules pretty fast. And I think you would know exactly this mistake. This is one of those mistakes you make once, and then you learn from it, and you generally don't make it again.
Yeah, and I think now what's the cool part about this is like I actually want to go learn about SwiftData and I want to learn about SwiftUI. I want to learn these things more, and I can do that by asking questions, but I can also just figure out what WWDC videos I should go watch as well for best practices or other conferences as well on it, which I think is neat.
I got to see a fun behind the scenes version of all this too. You were writing blog entries too about all of this experience. And I got to read these blog entries because the blog entries kept changing over time as you learned. Like, it was fun to like track your learning through all these blog entries. I was having fun sitting on the sidelines.
So here, if you go into the repo, which I'll put into the show notes, it's called like App Podcast Assistant. But when I was doing stuff, along each way, I was like, okay, I have this big chat and I did a lot and I could document stuff and it loves to document stuff. But I was like, I want to like go on a journey of what we did here. And the best way of doing that is like a written blog. So I put together like these big prompts, which is like write blog for this thing. So every time that I did something of major difference, I asked it to write a blog. So there's a blog folder. And there's the one was 3 SwiftData performance lessons from optimizing Podcast Assistant. So actually, the first time I did actual optimizations, which was like loading lists and doing stuff, I was like, okay, you fix a bunch of stuff, go write a blog post about it. And I said, go search montemagno.com, look at all my blogs, use my how I talk
Yeah.
about stuff.
Sure.
And then I did one which was like refactoring from SwiftData chaos to Poco architecture, which was this. And then there was one, the last one, which was from Poco hybrid back to pure SwiftData, lessons from a friend. I'll read it a little bit. It says, a few weeks ago, that's not accurate. It was like 2 days ago. I wrote about, and it links to this thing. TLDR, SwiftData's query felt unpredictable. Relationships were faulting at random times, and the UI wasn't updating when it should. So I built an intermediate Poco, plain old class object layer, with a podcast library store bridge to make everything just work. And it did work. Butter smooth performance, predictable updates, about 1,500 lines of carefully crafted bridge code synchronizing Pocos and SwiftData models. I was proud of it. Then I showed it to a friend who's been building SwiftData apps since the framework was launched. Their reaction? Why did you do all that? Just use @query directly, and when in doubt, create a new view. SwiftData reactively works great when you follow the patterns correctly. I copied and pasted like a text message you sent me. And then it says, I push back, but the UI updates were inconsistent. Relationships were faulting. Selection binding didn't work. They smiled. Did you add .tag to your list rows? Did you make your models hashable? Did you use external story for heavy data? I had not. So I spent a weekend, like 20 minutes, going back to pure Swift data. So it goes on and on. It's like a whole journey.
That's funny. It's
of
so
our
dramatic.
conversation. So dramatic.
Put a few
Yeah.
words in my mouth there, but that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'll be the I love this. Two things it made me think. A, this is genius. I really wish I did this for my other apps because they
It's
always
fun.
taught us in engineering college to like take notes. I
Yeah.
don't take notes. I've never have. I've done very large engineering projects and I've never taken notes. This is genius. Just be like, okay, I've got this long chat history here. Please summarize this into a blog so that like you can relearn it later and or we can have these fun moments together like this. But
Yeah.
secondarily, it's making me think like, geez, why aren't our chats just saved as like a JSON or XML file in our repository? Like it should be there. Like why is it in some mysterious cache directory in the IDE? I feel like all these chats are important. I feel like they
Yeah.
really should just be stored in the repo itself.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's kind of like my vibe. Hanselman has been vibing some stuff recently, and he was like, I have a ongoing, like, he's like, I have a doc that's like, every time I learn something or change something, I'm like, document that thing. But like, he's like, you just go back in history of like, he can see every single like kind of significant change and why, and like do this stuff on it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But I don't know how long that lasts. Like, that's my thing, is like, that lasts for like, I don't know, a few days. And I'm like, I got too many markdowns. Right. So I was thinking like significant things in my life of like, okay, how do I want to go and do this thing basically? But I think it's fun. It's a fun artifact. I think that blog is way more fancier than documentation. But if you look at feedback flow, it's like, here's all the documentation. A good pro tip is like, I was talking to Toby on the GitHub team and he's like, oh, I have a cron job that runs that fire off an agent that's like, hey, look at all the changes from the day and then go update the documentation to make sure it's like up to date and recent and blah, blah, blah. Cause the documentation can get out of date. So that's the other part too.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm sticking with it though. I love your blog idea and I really want the chat history just in the repo itself.
Yeah. Put in, there's nothing stopping you either. Like here it is.
Yeah.
And like the cool part is like, you can actually right click in VS Code on the chat and just say copy all, and it'll just give you like the markdown. Just gives it to you.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah.
Right click save. That'd be cool. So
yeah. Or it could just be automatic. Okay. So where are we? We have built 2 fun features that you need for production. Then you took the big move. You went from a scripty app to an editor app. You went through a few architectural changes in that app because it was slow because of you. Your bad
Yes.
data modeling,
Oh,
James. And now what? And you're still working on this thing because you've only spent like a few hours on it, right? Because the AI is writing all the code.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I'd say at this point, I'd only really spent a few hours on it, to be honest with you. And then at this point, it was AI time, baby. It was AI time. And
Right. Apple Intelligence time? Is that what you're saying?
Apple Intelligence, baby. I said, hey,
Heck yeah.
I got 3 ideas I want. Take a transcript, give me podcast name ideas. And then I was
Okay. A show title generator. That's great because we used to spend like 10 minutes after every episode arguing about that. I remember those days. Those were fun. Yeah.
Yep. I got the transcript. The cool part is once you have the transcript, that's the wealth of data, right? And you can do stuff with it. So I said, I want to be able to do the transcript. I want to be able to generate a description. Give me a short, medium, long description because I have to write a description like an animal every single time. I also said, I also generate social media posts. So I was like, generate social media posts for me.
Okay.
Why not? And then the more challenging one is I would like chapter markers on this button.
Okay.
Now,
so let me ask you, the name generator. I'm a little worried about its creativity, but that's definitely an easy problem for it. The summarize and the short, medium, long. It has to be pretty good at that. What's your experience so far? Are you actually running Apple Intelligence? Is it actually doing these things? Is it working?
And I said, I only want to use Apple Intelligence on device only. Let's go. And I said, find the documentation. I was like, find it, do a thing. No, I have a services folder and I have a AI folder inside of it. And there's a title generation service. Cool. And it's to do that is 60 lines of code.
Yeah.
And
it's kind of fun.
Most of it is documentation, comments. And for some reason, this gentleman, Mark, keeps showing up in my source code. I don't know what's going on there.
Good old Mark. He's a god that all Swift developers pray to. And you just have to say his name every 40 or 50 lines in your code, or else your code won't compile. His name's Mark. Yeah.
Yep. So Mark is there, and Mark is telling us a lot about the code. But there is a language model session. You give it instructions. I said, you are a creative No, I didn't tell it this. It says, you are a creative podcast producer. That's me, who writes engaging, concise episode titles. And then the prompt is, you are generating titles for a podcast episode based on its transcript.
See, I thought you would have said clickbait. You're like, trick people into playing this episode. Come on, man. Be dirty.
Oh, no. Well, it says, analyze a transcript, identify the topics that are discussed the most, focus primarily on the main topics. The title should reflect that. Generate 5 creative, concise titles for this podcast. Keep the titles under 10 words each. Make them engaging, descriptive, and SEO friendly. Now, I could adjust that and make it a little bit more like fun in this, but I would say the episode titles are pretty good. They're pretty solid.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's one of the prompt engineering. Like you got to start somewhere and just see if it's generating. I'm very happy you didn't make sure every episode title has a pun in it, because then life could have just gone really bad. So would you say your first system prompt was kind of good enough? You were pretty happy with the results there?
Easy, solid, one shot,
nice,
done. So simple to do. Yeah, and
I should say, sorry, one more thing. Apple Intelligence does have a few parameters you can choose. In all these LLMs, there's a thing called temperature, which is how much randomness it applies when it's sampling from the probability set that it generates. And this isn't perfect correlation, but the more random you make it, the more creative it gets, obviously, because it's picking things that aren't very predictable or probable in this case. That's another fun thing. You should mostly focus on the system prompt, asking exactly what you want it to do. But it is fun to play with the temperature settings. And I find a lot of people mess around with the prompt all day, but they don't mess with the temperature nearly as much as they should be.
Is that in the session or in the prompt?
It's in the options for the session. When you create a session, you receive an options thing. Yep. And even things like ChatGPT and all those, they all have a temperature setting. No one touches it. Everyone uses the default of 0.7, 0.8, or 0.9.
I like that.
no one does one uh, no randomness because then the LLMs tend to break. But it's just a good thing, especially when you want something creative out of it. Bump up that intelligence or bump up that temperature. Let it go a little crazy.
Yeah, I like that. I should do that on that one. That sounds really good. Because and the same with the description too, because it's pretty much exactly the same. The social posts are pretty much the same. I mean, it just generated a different prompt based on like what the different things are, and it just
Hmm.
output them for different things, different social media posts. It does a different one for different platforms, different lengths. It does one for Twitter, LinkedIn, and Threads, different things, and it outputs them. It's really cool. It just outputs the actual Poco as well. So that's kind of nice. I like that. And then the biggest problem was the chapter generation.
Yeah.
Because Frank,
Okay.
the AI is actually pretty clever. So for those first three, it decided, well, this transcript could be pretty big. So what if I just cut off the first?
Oh, context lengths. The nemesis of all fun in AI.
Yeah,
Context lengths.
because
Yeah.
for like our podcast, you actually probably don't need the entire podcast to actually, the transcript to do it. You probably actually only need like a little bit of it. So it was pretty clever and cut it off. And then I ran into this problem, which was, the context window. I was like, here's the entire transcript. Now you can, in the other ones, you don't need the time codes, but in this one, you need the time codes. It's important. I need you to basically find 5 to 10 important segments in this puppy and then do this. And it was just like, no, no, no. And the problem was, it's too big. Our podcast that I was generating off was even like 30 or 45 minutes. It's like, nope, can't
Especially
do it.
recently, we've been doing 1 hour podcasts.
Yeah.
We used to say our tight 30-minute podcast, but yeah, we've been talking a lot. And actually, I remember when Apple Intelligence first came out, I they don't really document what the context window length is, but in one of the WWDC videos, because that's where all the good information is, one of the engineers actually said it. At least for this version one, it's about a 4K 4,000 token context window. Which, if you've never done LLM programming, that's your inputs to it, system prompt, history, everything, and it's the output. So that all has to fit within 4,000 tokens.
And yes, this became the next biggest problem that you and I decided to solve, which was the good old sliding window approach. And this one makes sense. I kind of understood this, which was, let's chunk it together, summarize those chunks, give it time codes, basically shrink it down. The whole idea was, how do we make this as small as humanly possible? And the idea is, if we talk for 5 minutes about this AI feature, that is like one time code. It's really the only thing that's important is like the few time chunks that we're talking about this thing. So instead of it being, you know, um, 10,000 characters, it can be 200 characters. It can just like summarize the thing smaller than being the entire transcript, basically.
Yeah, especially back in the day, like we used to have 512 token context windows. So like in the early days of LLMs, you got really good at tricks for compressing things down. So if you had a long chat history, you'd say like summarize this entire chat history into 4 sentences, and then you
Yeah.
would use that as your reference. And it's just a good trick. I mean, even if you have the ridiculous 1 million token context windows that a lot of these networks feature these days, you don't want to actually pay for those million tokens.
Yeah.
So it still behooves you, especially if you're doing any LLM development, is come up with a data summarization strategy pretty early on. Especially if you're working on editors where users can keep adding data and adding data and adding data, you can't just count on that always fitting into your context. So if you're going to keep long chat histories or you're going to generate long stories, you're going to fit large data models into it, you need to come up with summarization strategies. And I think I pitched to you just the most obvious basic one is just, yeah, chunk up the episode and ask it to summarize those chunks and then paste the chunks back together, and that's the new context. It's kind of idiot proof. I mean, there's other ways. There's reg and all that kind of stuff, but I like the chunking and summarize the chunking approach. It's conceptually pretty simple and it generally works well in practice.
And the big difference too is that there's a sliding window, so you're actually doing overlapping windows. So you are kind of doing a chunk, and then the next chunk will have a little bit of the previous chunk and a little bit of the next chunk, and then back. Kind of slide this window across basically over it, and you're overlapping these windows. Now, I seem to not be able to get it to work really good. However, you decided to build a little application that worked perfect, and then I copied all of your code into my application. Actually, Copilot did, and that ended up working well. So, how did you actually solve it? Because mine wasn't perfect. Mine was maybe shoehorned into an existing thing, basically.
Well, if I can toot my own horn, it's because I actually coded mine and I didn't just ask an AI to do it. No, I'm just,
Ah,
it's fine.
interesting.
It's fine. I'm just messing. I think it's just a matter of it was faster. I had an idea of how I wanted this thing to work, and the big things I wanted to happen were the sliding windows and summaries, the sliding window with overlap so that it had some context from before where the window was starting, so it wouldn't just. The problem is context with all these things. If we just jump into you making a joke, it's not going to fully understand that. So you need some kind of overlap so it has some context to build off of. But the second big thing I really wanted you to take advantage of was structured inputs and structured outputs, because I think that those are some of the most powerful ways to use these LLMs. So although they all present themselves as these like chat interfaces where it's just free form text in, free form text out, the proper way as programmers to use these things is structured data in, structured data out. So instead of saying like, give me a transcript where the first line is a time code, the second line is the speaker, the third line is the actual summary, say, no, here's an object. It has three fields. One is a time code, one is the speaker, and one is a summary. And behind the scenes, what's happening is it's creating a little JSON schema, and it's telling these networks are now trained with an understanding of JSON schema. And it'll do that. And the really nice thing is when it's outputting stuff, it's guaranteed to generate an output that matches that schema. So then there's no ambiguity on exactly what data you want out of the thing. It's no guarantee it's going to generate good data for you,
Yeah.
but it'll at least be structured in
There
the way
is
that you
data.
want.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also a second opportunity beyond the system prompt to give it a little bit of metadata, describe what that data is. So it can say, like, um, this structure is a summarized part of a transcript. It's not just a chunk of a transcript. It's not just a section of a transcript. It is a summary of the transcript with a starting time code and summary text. So you're not saying time code text. You're saying starting time code summary text.
Yeah.
And those little clues matter a lot to
Yeah.
these LLMs. They pick up on little clues like that. The other advantage that structured data gives you is that you can give it properly formatted examples in a language it understands, which is JSON. All these things are just trained on JSON. And an important part of system prompts these days is giving examples, because no one trains their networks anymore. Back in the day, we would fine tune this network so it knew exactly
Mm.
what kind of data it'd be receiving and what kind of data you expect out of it. But nowadays, we are all using that capital G general part of it and relying on it just reading our minds and knowing exactly what data we want out. But instead of that, you just say, here's an example. If you see this kind of data, output this. If you see this kind of data, output that. And those really help the LLMs beyond just the system prompt. So I implemented the algorithm as I was describing it to you. I forced it to do structured data with metadata, so descriptions beyond the system prompt, and I gave it examples. And kind of, I one-shotted it as a human. It kind of just worked the first time I wrote it, and I was pretty happy with that. I meant to spend time fine-tuning the system prompt, but with those few tricks, it was already performing pretty well, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I had it pretty close, and I feel like this was the opportunity where like it was time for me to crack open a book basically and do some stuff. But you are my book, and then I cracked
Uh,
open Frank Krueger, and I gave him a problem, and he wanted to solve it, and he did, which is good. And then it was really neat because then I then told my coding agent, I literally went in to get a Copilot coding agent. I was like, hey, go take this repo, replace this thing, and then update all. And I was like, cool, like I can do that. Yeah, they're like, whoa. And I was like, oh, go analyze it. It's like, oh, this approach is better. It's like, oh, yeah, it's like, thanks.
Oh, good.
It's like,
It
oh,
said that.
so
It
this
gave me
approach is
props.
great. Whoever
Thanks,
wrote
buddy.
this code is a genius. It's like, okay, great. Anyways, it's really cool. It even
thanks, AI.
it even copied your bad debug shrinker like UI line by line. It's not great, but
No,
it did, which is hilarious. It's very bad, but it's cool. It works, and I worked on it. So now it's in there. The debug's in there. I'm now going to make it so I can save the sliding window, so I can regenerate things. I don't have to do it every time. It's the thing with Apple Intelligence is, actually, if you have a small context window, it's pretty fast to generate some things, but to generate those sliding windows, it takes forever. It's like really slow because it's doing one at a time. Boom. And now I don't know if you could parallelize it.
No, because the whole point is you're using that GPU to its max.
Yeah.
So, while theoretically the operating system technically allows it, you could parallelize them. In practice, there's one GPU there, and it has this amount of memory. There's a reason that context window is 4K. It's memory. It's not computation. It's nothing else. It's just memory.
Yeah.
And so you will just, that's always been the problem with running these LLMs on your machine is memory. It's so funny. In the early days of AI, we all thought we were going to be compute bound. No, turns out we're all memory bound these days.
Well, and how
so, you can't run them in parallel.
Yeah, and how I run this out, by the way, if people are interested, I almost run most of the time just from VS Code because I can just have it like build and do stuff and run the tests and everything from the Xcode MCP server, the build server. But I actually prefer just have Xcode open and then also run it from there too, because you get the profiler and the debugger and everything like that. And that's really nifty, especially to have it like output console logs and do things like that, just like a normal IDE would do. I think there's probably ways to maybe do it from VS Code, but I'm not really sure. Maybe there's not. It's got to be, I assume.
No, if you just run a Mac app from VS Code, it'll spit out all the debug info, and you can even have it bind to LLDB and get debugging information while it's running. You just got to set that stuff up in your VS Code launch task. Launch. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, yeah. Because what I did in VS Code is I set up a new profile. So I'd recommend this if you haven't messed around with profiles. I have my default profile, which is like my .NET development. I have a Swift and I have a Node.js web dev one. The cool part about this, what the profiles is that I copy over all of my settings from my default, and then I remove a bunch of extensions, and then I install ones that I need. So for this one, for example, I removed all my .NET stuff. I don't need it for Swift development, unless I was doing a backend or something with it. And then I installed the Swift language support, which is the official extension from the Swift team. And that also includes the LLDB DApp, which is the debugger built right in. And I guess I just need to bind that up basically. So that's cool. I have like a little tiny itty bitty, profile. And that every time, if you open a folder, you pick a profile. When you open that folder again, it'll pick that profile automatically.
Nice.
So really cool.
Yeah, we keep talking about profiles on this podcast, and I still don't use them enough. I think tonight you might have finally broken me. I'm like, I got to do that. The problem is for me, I have so many extensions because I do all sorts of weird stuff. So the weirdest thing for me is when I open some C# code and the C++ CMake thing starts complaining. I'm like, go away, CMake.
Well, totally. And you could have almost a profile. You could have a profile for every app if you wanted to. This is the profile for iCircuit, right? And then it just loads the stuff up. Anyways, okay, we're at an hour. I need to also be here for another podcast.
We got to summarize this transcript, baby.
I know. I'm going to try. Well, I'm implementing a new feature right now as we talk. Well, everyone can check out the source code. I'm going to definitely try to check in all of my changes into main so you can check it out because it is working fairly well. But isn't that for me? You can at least check out the code. You can critique it and just let me know what you think about it. And then, it turned out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it in general. I think it probably would just been easier for me to just call Microsoft Foundry or something like that and call an OpenAI like Nano, thing with or whatever. But this is much more fun. So, and I learned a podcast. Yeah,
fun, good. And you learned.
I learned a lot, and I have a little Mac app, and that's pretty cool. And it's the same thing. I was, there's this new thing about this ring light app or whatever that they're putting into Mac OS or whatever, and then Hanselman vibe code it for Windows and WPF, and I vibe coded that little typer thing in WinForms. It's like apps on demand, man. That's like my jam.
Yeah.
Just like, and this one's actually pretty. It's a real app. So, and because you kept saying,
It is.
but you can sync it, you can do stuff in iCloud. I'm like, Frank, this is an app for just me. Like nobody else is gonna get this. So, like no one cares about this app but me. You're like, oh, you can put it on. I'm like, no, I'm not gonna put it on the App Store because nobody wants this app. Like,
I gotta be honest though, now that you have the transcript summarizer and the description generator, I feel like you could put this one on the App Store. I really do feel like, although you wrote it for yourself, I think you would get some downloads.
I could do that. Transcript down, and then also the translator part of it too, I think would be neat.
Yeah,
People would
you
like
have
that,
some
man.
cool features, honestly.
Wow. Well, that made my day. I was going to do for this week's merch conflict. We'll end it on that super high note. So until next time, I'm James Montemagno.
And I'm Frank Kruger. Thanks for watching and listening.
Peace.